This is Reverend Ron, Enlightened Spiritual Master, and this is going to be video number 4 in my series today. I think this is possibly going to be the most important video that I make in this series, and here's why. First of all, the first thing is I'm a self-anointed Enlightened Spiritual Master. That means I didn't wait for anybody else to make me an Enlightened Spiritual Master or somebody to buy my books or anything like that. I just made myself one, and that's all there is to it. Now, you might be wondering what this has to do with you. Well, here's exactly and specifically what it has to do with you. This means don't assume that anybody else knows more than you do about anything, because oftentimes they don't. Now, I'm going to give you some specific examples about this subject here, and one of them is a real serious example, and I'll tell you how this relates to you. First of all, I have a no, it's not a 19 series, it's a 2003 Audi A4. Now, it's a real nice car. I bought it when it was 5 years old, and it's a real nice car, but I kept having a problem with the right tail light going out, and it went out about five or six times on me. I had about 4 different mechanics look at it and replace the bulb and all that good stuff, and it kept going out. So finally I decided I need to take a look at this myself and see maybe if there's something here that I'm missing, you know, or something I should know about. I took the cover off and looked in there, and sure enough, the bulb was missing. Now, 4 different mechanics that work specifically on Audis looked at this, and they didn't see that. So that's one illustration of don't assume that anybody else knows more than you do about a subject. Here's the second one. I had my taxes done this year by a very knowledgeable accountant, and she charges a lot of money to do my taxes. Now, I wrote a lot of covered calls on stocks that I owned last year, which I'm not going to try to get into explaining that on this video, because that would take more time than I have here. But when I gave my taxes to her to do for 2009, I assumed that she would know all about covered calls and know how to write them on the tax forms and everything like that. But about a month after I sat down and explained all this to her, she got back to me and called me back and told me she was having trouble understanding this, and she had to get with another accountant and figure out how to do this. So they did. And anyway, the bottom line was, when I got my bill for her services this year, it was about $465 more than, you know, it normally would have been. Now, here's the thing. Now, I read the IRS publication on that myself, and I figured out a way to do it myself, and that's how I'm going to do it next year. I'm going to report it myself in a different way, and I've concluded that I know just about as much about this as anybody else. I have a friend who's very knowledgeable about this. He doesn't know anything about it. My accountant, who has a big accountancy firm, I mean, it's a great big firm, she didn't know anything about it. The IRS certainly doesn't know anything about it. So I know just about as much about that as anybody else. This next one here is a plumbing example. I called a plumber that I know to replace a hot water heater of mine that went out. And while he was here, I was going to have him replace some washers on my Delta faucet. Now, I assumed he would have the washers for the faucet right on his truck, which the first thing is he didn't. I had to run up to the local hardware store and get them myself. Then a couple of the guys replaced them, and I assumed they would do it right, but when I checked the faucets later, they didn't open the right way. Faucet is supposed to open by turning it counterclockwise or left. Left is loose, right is tight. It's supposed to close by turning it to the right. One of them on each one wasn't set up that way, so I had to redo that myself. When they put the water heater in, the temperature was set, and when I turned the hot water on, it came out of the faucet. It was practically boiling, it was steaming, so I read the little manual that come with it and find out where to set it, and set it on A for 120 degrees or whatever, and that's a factory approved setting. So So I found out all this extra stuff myself by reading the book and figuring it out myself. So that's another example. I was in Pahrump just recently, Nevada, so I received a speeding ticket over there. So I was trying to call a lawyer over there to get the ticket reduced to a non-moving violation. I finally got a call from a lawyer, and she was willing to do it for $500, but I would have to show up over there myself. Well, that's 300 miles away. If I'm going to drive 300 miles over there, I might as well talk to the district attorney myself and save myself $500. So that's what I decided to do. So I assumed, you know, that I know just about as much about that process as anybody. That's another example. Now this last one is a medical thing, and now it had real serious consequences because I assumed that the medical people knew all about this subject and could take care of it. Now the first thing is, there's a little joke here about the medical profession. Some of you may know who Robert Ringer is. He's an author who wrote a whole lot of books back in the 70s and 80s, and one of his favorite sayings was, he said that, "I've never met God, but I can't imagine that he wears a stethoscope." Well, that's a joke in his books, but to me it had real serious, real-life consequences, and I'll tell you what the consequences were. Back in 2005, I had an automobile accident, and what happened is my car supposedly hit black ice and slid off the road in front of a semi going the other way, and my driver's side door was totally crushed, and if you saw the picture of the car, you'd assume someone died in that accident. But I was in the hospital for 3 weeks and got out and went back to work and everything. But what actually happened was I had a seizure and passed out at the wheel, but nobody diagnosed that. A year later, I had another seizure and passed out and fell on the floor, but again, nobody diagnosed it. They sent me to the hospital. I had all the tests. I had the brainwave scan. I had this test, that test, and nobody diagnosed it. And so that went by, and well, we don't know what to do about this, so so that went by. The next seizure I had, I rode my bicycle into a telephone post at a high rate of speed and fractured the C2 vertebrae on my neck. And for that reason, I had 3 pieces of titanium holding my neck together right now. The next seizure I had, I passed out in assisted living and hit the floor, and they still didn't diagnose it. The next one I had after that was about 3 months later. My little sister took me up to St. Luke's Hospital in Kansas City. They did a brainwave test, and the psychiatrist thought he saw something, so he started me on Depakote, and that seems to have fixed it. It's been 3 years and nothing's happened. But because this was never diagnosed any place along the line, I've got 3 pieces of titanium in my neck, and the C2 disc, it was rebuilt from a piece of bone in my hip. So that's the lesson I want to drive home on video number 4 here, is don't assume for any reason that anybody necessarily knows more than you do. And especially don't assume that in the realm of spiritual matters, because in the realm of spiritual matters, your opinion and your state of mind and everything else is just as good and just as valid as anyone else's. And that's it for video number 4 here. This is Reverend Ron, Enlightened Spiritual Master, signing off, and I'll see you in video number 5.